So what do you write to a grandmother you haven't seen for 35 years? This is the letter. My dear grandmother, I often think of you and remember you and my dear mother. I often dream that I'm with you in India, that I see you both in the room you used to sit in. No day of my life has ever passed without my thinking of my dear mother. I can remember the veranda in Hyderabad, and the place where the tailors worked, and the place at the housetop where my mother used to let me sit down and slide. When I dream of my mother, I am in such joy to have found her again that I awake, or else am pained in finding that she cannot understand the English I now speak. I can well recollect her cries when we left her, and I can now see the place where she sat when we finally parted. I focus in on this one man, and this to me was the most extraordinary story. Also the one that sort of told the really intimate details, because this young man, James Achilles Kirkpatrick, a Scotsman, who turns to Indian culture like so many people at this period. This is in the late 18th century, wears Indian costumes, likes having music and evenings like this. He falls in love with this girl, Kahir-Un-Nissa Begum, who is the niece of the Prime Minister of Hyderabad, and very undiplomatically, despite being the diplomat in charge of relations with the East India Company, he gets her pregnant. And it's a long and involved story, which the book tells, but this man gets to hear of it and basically uses it as blackmail, like the roar of its day, and turns Kirkpatrick into an agent for Hyderabad, working against the company. And these two men, the Nizam of Hyderabad and Arista Jar, basically play their role in modern spy movie talk. And in return, a deal is made with Hyderabad, whereby the British ally with Hyderabad against both the Marathas and Tipu Sultan. The rewards for this is that the Nizam builds for the British resident a copy of the White House in Washington, an exact replica. I mean, at the same time, so it's not a replica, but the same building gets built as the British residency in Hyderabad, as now lies, luckily vacated by Donald Trump now, but still sitting in Washington. And it's there still. It's now the Osmania Women's College. But at the back is the house Kirkpatrick builds for Kahir-Un-Nissa. And there they have two kids. There's Kirkpatrick in old age. And these two kids are brought up between these two worlds. And this is what was fascinating for me, was that behind this story of conquest of India by the British, you have a counter-conquest of the British by India, cultural conquest. And these kids are brought up. If I could do just a short reading.
I think it'd be nice.
The story,
in fact, if I'm not mistaken, Captain Kirkpatrick converted to Islam, didn't he, to marry Kahir-Un-Nissa?
So Kahir-Un-Nissa, first of all, marries Kirkpatrick. Kirkpatrick, the senior, James Kirkpatrick, converts to Islam to marry her. So you have the British ambassador in Hyderabad becomes a Muslim and does the full conversion ceremony. He has two kids who are brought up, Sab Alam and Sab Begum, in Hyderabad with speaking court Persian, but also obviously knowing English because their father's English and Scottish rather, and the two together are brought up. But then they're sent back to boarding school in Britain, and everything goes wrong. Kirkpatrick catches a fever and dies. Kahir-Un-Nissa is rejected by her uncle, who's the Prime Minister. She's not allowed back in Hyderabad. She dies in great pain on the coast at a place called Machilipatnam. And then there's a gap of 30 years, and then something quite extraordinary happens. This picture had been painted of the two kids before they leave India. The two kids are sent back, they're converted to Christianity on arrival, they become Brits. Kitty, the boy dies, but the Kitty grows up to be very beautiful. Her tutor is Thomas Carlyle, who dedicates a book to her. And she eventually marries a British cavalry officer, lives in Torquay in a villa, is an evangelical Christian. Complete change of lifestyle. Then, though, suddenly, she walks into a house in middle age, and there is the picture of herself, which she'd last seen painted in India as a 4-year-old, up on the wall, unmistakably her. What's it doing there? She's walked into the house of the man who seduced Kahir-Un-Nissa after her father's death. And anyway, she pieces this all together. And the final episode, but this is not a novel, this is all entirely based on a very detailed documentation. She gets in touch with her granny, who's still alive, a Shia Muslim living in Harem and Hyderabad. So you have this extraordinary correspondence at the end of the book between a Hyderabadi Muslim and an evangelical Christian, but who are mother and grandmother, grandmother and granddaughter. So what do you write to a grandmother you haven't seen for 35 years? This is the letter. My dear grandmother, I often think of you and remember you and my dear mother. I often dream that I'm with you in India, that I see you both in the room you used to sit in. No day of my life has ever passed without my thinking of my dear mother. I can remember the veranda in Hyderabad and the place where the tailors worked, and the place at the housetop where my mother used to let me sit down and slide. When I dream of my mother, I am in such joy to have found her again that I awake, or else am pained in finding that she cannot understand the English I now speak. I can well recollect her cries when we left her, and I can now see the place where she sat when we finally parted, and her tearing her long hair. What worlds would I give to possess one lock of that beautiful and much loved hair? How dreadful to think that so many, many years passed when it would have done my heart such good to think that you loved me. And when I longed to write to you and tell you these feelings that I was never able to express, a letter which I'm sure would have been detained by my uncle. And now, how wonderful it is, after 35 years, that I'm able for the first time to hear that you think of me and love me. And have perhaps wondered why I did not write to you, and you have thought me cold and insensible of such near dear ties. I thank God that he has opened a way for me to make the feelings of my heart known to you. Will this reach you, and will you care for the letter of your grandchild? My own heart tells me that you will. May God bless you, my own dear grandmother.
Oh, absolutely wonderfully heartwarming. This heartwarming letter was read aloud and translated for the grandmother?
So the way that Kitty hears about this thing is they find a friend who's working in the British residency in Hyderabad, and he not only tells her this very delicate story that her mother was seduced by this man Russell, who then incidentally goes on to build the West Coast Railway in London later. I know you have railways very much in your wonderful book. And so she walks into his house and she sees it there, and it's the guy in Hyderabad who speaks Persian who acts as the go-between, translating letters in both.
So the correspondence did reach it. Oh, that's so lovely. It must have moved the grandmother.
And they correspond, and the letters exist, and they're all in the book. And then they make plans to meet, but then the grandmother dies, and they're never reunited.
Very sad.
If you've enjoyed the conversation that you just heard, do subscribe to our channel for much more.